In the initial stages of Zen training, the master will discourage thinking. Although you may come to him with a lot of ideas, your difficulty is not going to be solved by your ideas. It is not going to be solved by talk and intellectualization, and so they are not encouraged. Intellectualization creates a gap or lack of rapport between you and your life. You may think about things so much that you get into the state where you are eating the menu instead of the dinner, where you value money more than the wealth, and are generally confusing the map with the territory. So what the master wants to do is get you to become part of the landscape, and to get you into relationship with what is as distinct from ideas about what is. This is a very important preliminary discipline, but later on you may also realize that the process of thinking is also what is, that thoughts in their own domain are as real as rocks, and words have their own reality as much as sky and water. Thoughts about things are in their own turn things, and lead you eventually to the point where you can intellectualize and think in an immediate way. The philosophy of Tao sees man as a part of nature rather than dominating it. There are several well-known Chinese landscape paintings with the title Poet Drinking by Moonlight. When you look at any one of them, at first you see a vast landscape. Only after searching very thoroughly, almost with a magnifying glass, do you finally find the poet tucked away in a corner of the painting drinking wine. If, however, the subject, poet drinking by moonlight, were painted by a Western painter, the poet would be the central figure, dominating the whole picture, and the landscape a mere backdrop. Of course, some Chinese painters specialized in family portraits and painted very formal paintings of ancestors on their thrones, but the Taoist and Zen-inspired painters portrayed man as an integral part of nature. Man is something in nature, just as everything else is, including mountains and streams, trees, flowers, and birds. He is not commissioned by some sort of supernatural being to farm or dominate nature. The Taoists see nature as a self-regulating, self-governing, and indeed democratic organism, a totality. It all goes together, and this totality is the Tao. When we speak in Taoism of following the course of nature, or following the way, what we mean is doing things in accord with the grain. This does not mean we do not cut wood, but that when we cut wood, we cut along the grain, where the wood cuts most easily. In relationships with other people, we try to interact along the lines that are the most genial. This is the great fundamental principle called Wu Wei, or not forcing. Wu Wei is often translated as not doing, not acting, or not interfering, but not forcing seems to me to hit the nail on the head. Never force a lock because you will bend the key or break the lock. Instead, jiggle the key until it turns. Wu Wei means always acting in accord with the pattern of things as they are. When we follow the principle of Wu Wei, we do not impose any kind of extraneous force on a situation, because such force, by its very nature, is not in accord with the situation. For example, the people living in an urban slum are in a bad situation. They need better housing. But if we simply go in and knock the slum down and put in its place an architect's imaginative notion of a super efficient high-rise apartment building to store these people as if they were goods, we do not solve the problem. We create utter chaos. The slum, for all its shortcomings, has an ecosystem all of its own. It consists of a very complex system of relationships which make it a going concern, even though it may not be going very well. And anybody who wants to alter that situation must first become sensitive to all the conditions and interrelationships involved. It is terribly important to become aware of the interdependence of every form of life upon every other form of life. This is how, for example, we cultivate the animals that we eat. We look after them and feed them and see that they breed in reasonable quantities. We do not do it very well, as a matter of fact, and troubles are arising about the supplies of fish in the ocean and many other species resulting from our poor and short-sighted husbandry. But in the greater ecosystem, it is clear that the apparent conflict among various species is not actually a competition. Instead, it is a very strange system of interrelationship, a system of things feeding on each other and cultivating each other at the same time. This is the idea of the friendly enemy, the necessary adversary who is part of life. You have conflicts going on in your own body, and all kinds of microorganisms are eating each other up. But if that were not happening, you would not be healthy. All the interrelationships of nature, whether they appear to be friendly relationships as between bees and flowers, or conflicting relationships as between birds and worms, are actually forms of cooperation. This is called mutual arising. When you understand this is when you understand this as the basis of all existence and are able to act without forcing, your life is spontaneous, a life which is so of itself, natural, not forced, and not unduly self-conscious. Now another term that is important, although it has greater use in Neo-Confucian philosophy and Buddhism than in the writings of Lao Tzu, is Li. This is a very useful concept in understanding the sort of natural order of mutual interdependence and mutual arising. Li originally meant the markings in jade, the grain in wood, or the fiber in muscle. It is defined nowadays in most dictionaries as reason or principle, but this is not a very good translation. Joseph Needham once suggested that organic pattern was an ideal translation, and it is certainly preferable to reason. The markings in jade are what make it beautiful, and as you look down at the ocean you see patterns in the foam after a wave breaks. After you watch those patterns, you know they will never make an aesthetic mistake. They are not symmetrical and are rather difficult to describe. They are wiggly, like the markings in jade and the grain in wood, which also reflect the fluid patterns of water. All these things exhibit Li, and they all have distinct forms that we can distinguish quite clearly from what we call a mess. The foam patterns of waves, the mineral patterns of jade, and the vegetable patterns of wood are extraordinarily orderly. Yet they do not have an obvious order, and nobody can ever pin this organic order down completely. We know that it is order and that it is something quite different from a random mess, but there is no way of defining that order completely. To be able to paint that way, or live that way, or to deliver justice that way, you have to have that order within you innately. You have to have an essential sense of Li, but there is no way of prescribing it. This is very difficult for teachers, because in all of our modern schools and universities, we are attempting to teach creativity. The trouble is that if we found a method whereby we could teach creativity, and everybody could explain just how it was done, it would no longer be of interest. The mysterious, the dark black of lacquer, the impenetrable and profound depth out of which glorious things come, is always an essential element in the creative. There is a poem that says, "When the bird calls, the mountain becomes more mysterious." Imagine that you are in a mountain valley and everything is silent. Suddenly, somewhere off in the distance, an unseen crow calls. You do not know where the crow is, but its cry emphasizes the silence and heightens the sense of mystery. There is a Chinese poem written by a man who went to find a sage who lived in a little hut in the mountains with a boy there to serve him. I asked the boy beneath the pines. He said, "The master has gone alone, herb gathering somewhere on the mount, cloud hidden, whereabouts unknown." The best teachers of athletic and artistic skills are those who teach without forcing. I once studied piano, though I am absolutely no good at it now because I don't practice. But I had an absolutely awesome teacher for a while, and he was a very great musician with the highest standards. When I first went to see him, he said, "Let me see what you can do." So I played a song for him. And he said, "The trouble is that you are playing too hard. You're hitting the piano, and you should never hit a piano. Actually, all you have to do in order to play a piano is to drop your hands on it, and to do this properly you have to have relaxed arms." He made me practice for a while and felt my muscles to see if I was relaxed or not, and then he said, "Now just drop your hands on the piano. I don't care what notes you hit, just drop your hands and let them fall. There is enough energy in the weight in your arm to play as loud as you will or as soft as you will. Just let them drop." He kept feeling my arms. "No, no, you're getting too tense. You must pretend that you are Lao Tzu," he said, for he was a very educated man, and he knew about these things. After a while, I was able to relax, and he said, "Now, after dropping your hands, all you have to do is hit the right notes. You know, the same thing is involved in making a very complex trill," and he demonstrated. He just dropped his hand on the piano, and at the same time his fingers went flump, and produced a magnificent ornamentation. We went on and we practiced this for some time, and then he said, "Now let's get around to hitting the right notes. Now let us return to the problem of thinking about thinking. Sometimes people are removed from life because they dwell entirely in the world of the intellect. They are living in a world of symbols. Intellectuals are in a way removed from life, tied up in their categories and catalogues, their musts and must-nots. Yet this realm is also real, and thinking about thinking can be lived with as much directness, freshness, and spontaneity as life without thinking. But in order to live in the realm of thinking about thinking with full spontaneity, we must no longer regard the symbol, the thought, the idea, or the word as a block of life, or a means of escape from life. To be able to use the symbol, but not as means of escape, you have to know that you cannot escape in the first place. Not only can you not escape, but there is no one to escape. There is no one to be delivered from the prison of life. The liberation of the mind from symbols is exactly the same process as breaking up the links between successive movements and the illusion of a continuing self that travels from movement to movement. A continuing self is as much an illusion as a wave of moving water, or the appearance of a solid circle created by moving a light in the dark. The fallacy of the continuous self is pointed out by the saying, "No one perceives anything, and no one experiences anything. There is simply seeing and experiencing." In fact, we introduce these redundancies through language when we talk about seeing sights, hearing sounds, and feeling feelings. There are sights, there are sounds, there are feelings. We do not feel a feeling. The feeling itself already contains the feeling of it. That is very simple. Sight does not depend on the existence of the seen and the seer, bound together by some mysterious process. The seer and the seen, the knower and the known, are what we call terms. Terms mean ends, and these are in mathematical language called limits. Now, when we pick up a stick, the stick has two ends, and they are the limits of the stick. The ends of the stick do not exist as separate points, which encounter each other on the occasion of meeting at a stick. Actually, they are abstract points, and the ends in and of themselves are considered as purely geometrical Euclidean imaginations. The stick is the actual reality. In the same way, in the phenomenon called experience, reality is not an encounter of the knower and the known. Reality is the experience that can be termed as having two aspects, two ends, the knower and the known, although this is only a figure of speech. In a neurological sense, everything you see is yourself. What you are aware of is a state of your nervous system, and there is no other knowledge whatsoever. That does not mean that your nervous system is the only existing reality, and that there is nothing beyond your nervous system. But it does mean that all knowledge is knowledge of you, and that therefore, if in some mysterious way, you are not different from the external world you know. If you see then that what you experience and what you are the same thing, then take it a step further and realize that you are in the external world what you are looking at, just as I am in your external world, and you are in my external world, and yet I am in the same world you are. My inside is not separable from the outside world. It is something that the so-called outside world is doing, just as it is doing the tree, the ocean, and everything else in the outside world. Now, isn't that great? We have now completely eliminated the person in the trap, the one who either dominates the world or suffers under it. It has vanished. It never was there. And when that happens, you can play any life game you want. You can link the past, the present, and the future together and play roles, but have seen through the great social lie that one accumulates or owns experiences, whether memories, sights, sounds, or other people. We are always building ourselves as the haver of all this. But if you think that you have been had,